Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jim Podolske. I'm filling in for Diana tonight as she's off on retreat. Over the last couple weeks, she's been giving a number of talks that have included talking about the 5 hindrances. And so I wanted to give a talk tonight that included that. If you've been around this Dharma scene a while, you've probably heard about the Eightfold Path. It's a foundational paradigm for the Buddhist tradition that we practice in the Theravadan tradition. It's kind of a way of organizing the most important practices that the Buddha taught, so that if one is interested in experiencing liberation, freedom from greed, delusion, and hatred, freedom from dukkha, which is sometimes translated as suffering or dissatisfaction, or in maybe common terms, just the bummerness of life. Then these practices that the Buddha described that are in the Eightfold Path are really the way to get there. The first, these 8 path elements are all interrelated, and so it's not like you cultivate one and then cultivate the next and cultivate the next. But for purposes of talking about them, it's easiest to kind of make them into a linear pattern. So the first 2 are right view, are the wisdom factors. Right view, which is really starting to look at your experience through the frame of the Four Noble Truths, which is seeing that there is suffering in your life, seeing that there is dukkha, that there is either just mild discontent all the way to just out and out, sort of almost unbearable conditions. And that it's important to see what's that coming from. That it's coming from our clinging to something, and that there's a possibility for the ending of that. And then the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path. This is the way to achieve freedom. So that's the first of the path factors. The second one is right intention, having intentions of being letting go of greed, letting go of ill will, letting go of harming of others. That those intentions really kind of set us on a path to be able to be free. If we're trying to be free but also harming ourselves or harming others, that's not going to work. The next part of the Eightfold Path are what they call the ethical part, developing right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And those mostly have to do with how we interact with others, how we interact with other people one-on-one or in community or in groups. So those all involve cultivation of appropriate action towards others. And then finally, the third set is the samadhi set, which involves wise effort, wise mindfulness, and wise concentration. And in this center, often people start with right mindfulness and right concentration, kind of wanting to develop a mind that is aware of what's happening as it's happening, and a mind that can be steady and focused so that it's not jumping all over the place. So tonight I'm going to talk about wise effort. Because the Eightfold Path is so foundational to this practice, IMC offers a course every year, a 9-month course, going through each of these 8 path factors. And it just so happens this month they're doing wise effort. So that's why that's on my mind. I was inspired by something that Gil said yesterday morning. When you start the practice with something like developing mindfulness and concentration, there is a cultivation going on, and most of it is around observing. Most of it is about developing a sense of awareness of what's going on as it's going on. And being able to stay with it in a very steady and settled way. Or at the very least noticing that you're not in a stable and steady way, that the mind is jumping around, and at least noticing that. So those two really involve primarily observing. Wise effort really involves cultivating. So it's not just noticing what's going on, but it's also making some effort, actually using whatever agency we have, whatever choice we have to choose what we pay attention to, what kind of mind states, or states of the heart and the mind that we're cultivating, and which ones we're eliminating. So right effort really is much more of the kind of the active cultivating part of this practice, although it also includes the observing part. You have to observe what's going on so that you know how to do the cultivation. One of the descriptions for wise effort is it's kind of like gardening, right? Things start to grow up out of the ground, and you have to decide which of these things are what you want to develop, what you want to cultivate, and which are the weeds, which are the things that really are going to sap the nutrients and the strength and the light from those things that you want. So there are weeds that need to be pulled up. And in the same way, we can think of our heart and mind as being like a garden. So the first thing we need to be able to recognize is what are the things that are weeds, and what are the things that are the plants that you want to grow. The weeds are often referred to as unwholesome mind states. You might also call that unbeneficial or afflictive? What are the mind states that are like an affliction to us? And which are the ones that we want to encourage? So in some ways we have to figure that out for ourselves. You have to figure out which states of mind really aren't helpful to my development and which ones are. Some of the guidance on that comes from this book by Bhante Gunaratna. See, this one is called 8 Mindful Steps to Happiness. And one of the characteristics of the unwholesome states are that they include the 5 hindrances. And you may have heard Diana talk about the 5 hindrances over the last couple weeks. The first one is greed, that sense of not just wanting, but sort of wanting in a afflictive way, in sort of a sort of addictive way. So greed, sensual desire, lust are some of the stronger forms of that. When those are operating, it's hard to see what's going on, right? They become so enticing that all we see is what we want. And we don't necessarily see the harm that's coming to us or others as we try to grasp for more and more. The second, the second hindrance, or family of hindrances, it's really a spectrum, is aversion, or ill will, or hatred. And whereas with greed, we're trying to hold on to something, usually something that can't be held on to. I mean, pleasant only can be pleasant for so long. With aversion, it's really trying to push away those things that oftentimes can't be pushed away. And so there can be a lot of suffering that's generated from being in that state of aversion. So those are the 2 biggest hindrances. The other 3, the next 2 come in pairs. The next one is sloth and torpor. That's where there's little or no energy. Either one of them is little or no energy in the mind, sort of a dullness, or little or no energy in the body, sort of drowsiness. And when if one or both of those is operating, then it's hard to see what's going on, because we don't have a bright enough awareness, a strong enough awareness of what's going on. The 4th hindrance is a pair for body and mind, which is restlessness and worry. So restlessness, unlike sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry is an overabundance of energy. So the body just, can't sit still. And worry is often, the mind can't sit still, right? It's going all over the place. And so when that's operating, again, it's hard to imagine that you can really settle down and find peace. And then the fifth hindrance is doubt. Or skeptical doubt. And doubt keeps us going around in circles. It's kind of like a dog chasing its tail. It's just, should I be doing this or should I be doing something else? And it never resolves. What it reminds me of is when I learned computer programming in the early 1970s, the program of choice was Fortran, and it was possible to write a program that would have a loop in it that would never reach a termination criterion. It would just go and go and go until the operator showed that your job had run out of resources, it had run out of time, and then it would just get terminated. So doubt can be kind of like an infinite loop. It just never, on its own, it can just keep going. There are some other more subtle forms of these unwholesome mind states that are called the 10 fetters. And that's too long of a list for me to go through tonight. But if you look up the 10 fetters, it's on the internet. They tend to be more subtle experiences that keep us from being totally free. But some of them only are totally resolved when you become an arhat. So I wouldn't start there. I'd start with the hindrances. Yeah, so the first thing is to learn for yourself what are the unwholesome mind states and what are the wholesome mind states. And it occurred to me as I was thinking about this that in my mind, one of the things that distinguishes wholesome mind states from unwholesome mind states is that wholesome mind states tend to be associated with letting go and opening up. And unwholesome mind states tend to be around closing down, contracting, and grasping. So that's a kind of a general criterion, but when you find yourself, kind of getting more and more contracted, either physically or mentally, or holding more tightly, grasping things more tightly, that may be a sign that the mind state that you're in isn't going to lead to a life of peace and freedom, right? So, and likewise, when you're in a state where there's an openness, a letting go, some sense of generosity and kindness, that you're on the right track. So that's kind of a general way to describe those two categories. Right effort then consists of 4 activities. The first one is preventing the arising of unarisen, unwholesome mind states. So how do you do that? Well, I think for me, it starts by falling into a lot of unwholesome mind states. And then over time, you start to recognize what caused that unwholesome state to arise. What are the causative factors? What triggered it? And then as you start to see what the causative factors are that bring forth that kind of a state, you have a better chance of catching it either before it starts at all or before it gains much momentum. So I probably have told this story before. When I was about 3 years old, my father was doing a home improvement job on our house. And when he would get frustrated, when something would go wrong, he would start to swear. And I was in the bedroom watching him work and all of this stuff. And then at some point I walked out of the bedroom into the living room and I started repeating some of these words I heard my father use. I had no idea what they meant. I was telling my mother all of these words, all these swear words, and she was aghast. But I realized that nowadays, or for most of my life, when I would do something where frustration would start to arise, where something would start going wrong, almost immediately, one or more of those words would come out of my mouth. And when I wasn't aware of that, if I just let that go, it would go from just being a mental activity to my whole body would start to get agitated. That frustration could really build. I'd just be ready to, throw a tool or something. Nowadays, recently I was doing a plumbing project at home, and if you've ever worked underneath a sink and it's not much room, and sure enough, one thing went wrong, and I found myself, a swear word coming out of my mouth. But nowadays, when I hear that, I can go, oh, yeah, that's a sign. I must be frustrated. There must be frustration here. And so I stopped what I was doing. I thought about it. I reread the instructions, and I was able to proceed without having to go through this really contracted, agitated state of frustration. So for the first one, for the preventing, really requires us to get to know what are the warning signs. It might be that you have to go and talk with some particular coworker that just seems to trigger you. Or anger, or what triggers desire. I can sit on the website of Apple and look at this one particular laptop, and it's like, oh God, if I had that laptop, it's got 64 gigs of memory, and it's got 24 cores and all this other stuff. It's useful to look at it, and if it makes sense to buy it, but to just sit there and look at it over and over again and kind of obsess about it, that's, after a while, it's actually kind of tiring and doesn't feel very good. So for preventing, that one really requires getting to know how your mind works so that you can get those warning signs. But you can't prevent all of them. Things get through. Some unwholesome mindsets they come so fast that before you know it, you're in it. They've arisen. And so the second one is abandoning arisen unwholesome mind states. And there the Buddha gave some, number one was mindfulness is always helpful. Being mindful really can help. But for arisen unwholesome mind states, he had a 5-element strategy. The first one was, if possible, see if you can just ignore it. Like, okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's anger or that's greed. And then just drop it. Now, you might be able to do that if it isn't so strong. The second one is to divert your attention from that thought to some better thought. So just, anger is here, but I can also, here's some other things I can think about. And so just divert your attention from what's unwholesome to something that's more wholesome. The third one is replacing the unwholesome thought with its opposite. So, for example, if greed is arisen in your mind, you might think about generosity. You might try to replace those thoughts of greed with thoughts of generosity. The fourth one involves, there are two parts. One is it can involve deciding, well, let's just investigate what this unwholesome mind state is like. How does it feel in the body? And is this something that I want? Is this where I want to hang out? And you can also look at what are the causes that came together for this to arise, and notice that all of those causes are impermanent, that they'll arise and pass. And so this whole unwholesome mind state is also impermanent. So it's not like when anger arises, it isn't that that's going to be there for the rest of your life. It's just, it's arisen, it's temporary, and it'll pass. And then the final one, which I always was kind of surprised, it sounds kind of harsh, is there's sometimes when there's an unwholesome mind state where you just have to use force of will to kind of like wrestle it to the ground. And I thought, well, that doesn't really, is that what the Buddha said? But I started to think, there are times when people are just overcome with some really harmful, destructive impulse. Think of, somebody harming another person, injuring them or even killing them. And often it's just a spontaneous thing where the state of mind is strong. And so in those cases, it's really important to be able to have a strong enough practice and strong enough effort to be able to tell yourself, no, I'm not going to do this. No, I'm not going to tell a boss, what a, blankety blanky is. I'm just, that may seem like, it would be so satisfying, but it would only be satisfying for, a few seconds. And then you'd realize that it harmed a relationship, it harmed, who knows what it harmed. But so being as a last gasp, there may be times when an unwholesome mind state really has to be dealt with as much force and energy as is possible. So then, so for unwholesome mind states, there's the preventing and the abandoning. And then for wholesome mind states, there's the cultivating, the unarisen wholesome state. And one of the ways, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about cultivating a wholesome mind state is practicing some of the loving kindness, the Brahma Viharas, cultivating well-wishing for others, sympathetic joy, compassion, equanimity. Again, those qualities of mind that are expansive, that are open-handed. There's also the paramis, some of the foundational practices for this school of Buddhism. Things like generosity, being generous both to yourself and to others. Offering safety to people through living an ethical life. Being patient, truthful. All of those are some of the wholesome states of mind. And there's more. It's really up to you to discover them for yourself. Which ones really seem to support you, give you a sense of well-being, a sense of living in harmony and happiness. And then the final one is maintaining. So maintaining arisen wholesome mind states. So once you've cultivated, something like loving kindness, how do you maintain it? There may be some momentum to it, and that's great. And it may also require, some continual effort to keep it going. One of the practices that I was taught many years ago, and I've used when I travel, is when I go to an airport. You're often sitting in the waiting area, for your flight to be called and your group and so forth. And for me, it can be a little stressful. Even though I've got my ticket, everything's lined up, I've got my baggage, still there's, strange people I don't know, and who knows what's going to happen. And so one of the practices, since I have nothing else to do, is I sit there, and as people walk by on the concourse, I wish them well. Somebody I've never met, just walking by, may you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be peaceful. I don't say it out loud, but, it's just, why not? It may or may not affect them, but it definitely affects me. I go from feeling like I'm sitting in a group of strangers who may or may not be hostile, I don't know, to feeling like I'm sitting with I'm surrounded by other human beings that I can wish well for. And it's easy to maintain that, for 20 minutes or however long, it takes from when I get to the gate to when I get on the plane. And of course, even once you're on the plane, it doesn't have to stop. I think as you start to feel how good it feels to be in one of those mind states, then there's more of a natural tendency to just want to stay there, to just keep it going. I remember years ago Gil saying this thing, and I can't remember it exactly the way he said it, but it was like, when you have a sense of peace and ease, what is important enough for you to give that up? Like, what would you give that up for? What would be so important that you'd say, okay, well, I'm going to get rid of my peace of mind. So I think the maintaining part, also takes effort. I suspect that there are people who have practiced long enough that it's just kind of second nature. It just keeps going. But for those of us that are still affected by unwholesome mind states, it's something we need to do. Over the last year or so, I've been finding that I don't sleep so well at night, and when I wake up in the morning, the first thing when I wake up is I feel kind of groggy and kind of averse to getting out of bed. And I could just lay there and go, oh, poor me, why isn't life better? And, why didn't I get a better night's sleep? But instead what I do nowadays, when I wake up, the first thing I do is that I notice that's the kind of mind state that's operating. That's what's going on. And so rather than trying to do anything at all complicated, I just start by paying attention to my breath. I just lay in bed and I just do breath meditation. And one of the things that does is I notice my breathing slows down, and also my heartbeat slows down. I've had some stents put in a few years ago, and so I notice sometimes when I first wake up, my heartbeat seems a little fast and a little erratic. And by just doing breath meditation, my breath and my heartbeat just really even out. So there's a physiological component of doing breath meditation in the morning. Also, some of that drowsiness goes away. I start feeling more energy. So starting the day with breath meditation really seems to make a difference to the mind states and to the body. And then I may also then go into loving kindness practice. Just kind of see whoever comes to mind first. Just, okay, it doesn't really matter. Just who comes to mind this morning. I start doing loving kindness for them. And then I don't set a particular amount of time. I just decide to do it until it's clear to me I'm ready to face the day. I'm ready to get out of bed. I'm ready to face whatever the day holds. And it sets a tone. It kind of sets a tone that, okay, you can start your day by applying right effort. It isn't something that you can wait till the end of the day, till 9 at night after your last television program is over, and then it's like, okay, well now I'll do right effort or wise effort. You can start your day with it. You can find creative ways throughout the day to tune into what's going on in my mind right now. And is this what I want? Or is there some way that I could change it? I mean, a lot of what happens in our lives is just habit. It's just, it's not necessarily something that we can change instantaneously. But we do have some agency. We do have some choice. And by using the choice that we have, we can cultivate a more wholesome state of mind. And then the final thing that I'll say is the practice only is effective if you do it. So you can hear as many talks as you want about right effort or any kind of practice. You can listen, you can read books, you can hear podcasts, everything else. All of that's very useful. All of that cognitive learning is useful, but it's not enough. If you want the practice to make a difference, you got to do it. So I think that's the key take home about right effort is you have to start paying attention. Well, if you want the benefits, you need to make the effort. So thank you all. We've got a few minutes if anyone has any questions. Yeah, Manny, could you maybe either one of those microphones should work. And then push the button until the green light comes on.
So I'm just going to add on what you said about just doing the practice. I found out that through my personal journey that when I'm practicing in person, so like with multiple people, but doing it with consistency, maybe getting a little bit obsessive with it, that's when I found it to be most beneficial. So just adding on what you said.
Okay, thank you.
You find it useful.
Thanks. Okay.
Anyone else? Also, thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and Diana will be back next week, and I'll stay around afterwards if anyone wants to come up and ask me any further questions. So thank you all.